The coffee shop smelled like cinnamon and rain, and Elena Vasquez was 3 minutes away from being cornered by a man she'd spent 4 months trying to forget. She saw him through the window before he saw her, walking down the sidewalk with that same lazy confidence that had fooled her for 2 years, and her stomach dropped the way it always did. Daniel Marchetti, her ex, the man who'd promised her forever and then slapped her across the face in the kitchen of the apartment they'd shared when she'd asked him why there were unfamiliar earrings on his nightstand. She turned away from the window and stared down at the cappuccino she'd been nursing for 40 minutes, the foam long since collapsed, the cinnamon bleeding in brown streaks across the surface. Her hands were shaking. For months of changing her number twice, of moving apartments, of quitting the bakery she'd loved and finding work at a little flower shop 3 neighborhoods away. For months of checking her mirrors when she drove, of double-locking her door at night, of waking up at 3 a.m. with her heart pounding because she thought she'd heard his voice outside her window. And here he was, walking toward the door of the one coffee shop in the city where she'd finally allowed herself to breathe. She had 3 seconds to decide what to do, and in those 3 seconds, her body made the decision for her. She stood up too fast, the chair scraping against the wood floor, and her eyes swept the room like a drowning woman looking for a rope. The coffee shop was nearly empty. A woman with a stroller near the back, a college kid in headphones, and at the small table near the window, his back half turned to the street, a man in a charcoal suit reading a newspaper with a cup of black coffee beside him. Elena didn't think. She walked. She crossed the floor in 6 quick steps and sat down across from the stranger like she belonged there. And before he could even look up from his paper, she leaned forward and whispered, the words coming out fast and raw. Please just pretend you know me. My ex-boyfriend is walking in right now, and if he sees me alone, he's going to please. I'll leave the second he's gone. I swear, I just need 1 minute. The stranger lowered his newspaper. He didn't startle, didn't blink, didn't even seem surprised. He looked at her with eyes the color of storm water, and then his eyes flicked past her shoulder to the door, took in the situation in the space of half a breath, and came back to her face. And then, calmly, without any hesitation at all, he reached across the table and took her hand in his. His palm was warm. His grip was steady. He lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles, soft and deliberate and slow, and he said in a voice low enough that only she could hear, "Smile at me, sweetheart. Like you missed me." And Elena, God help her, smiled. The bell over the door jingled. She heard Daniel's footsteps, the particular rhythm of them that she'd trained her body to recognize at a distance of 100 feet. She heard him order a drink. She heard him turn. She heard his footsteps stop, and then the stranger across from her, still holding her hand, tilted his head slightly and said loud enough to carry, "Tell him you're taken." She didn't understand at first. She was still trapped in the smile she'd forced onto her face. But the stranger's eyes stayed locked on hers, calm as still water, and he repeated it quieter. "Tell him." And then Daniel was there. "Elena." He said it like a question and an accusation all at once, like he couldn't believe she was real, like he'd been looking for her for a long time. He was standing at the edge of their little table with his hands in the pockets of his leather jacket, and he was smiling the way he used to smile when they'd fought, and he was about to apologize without really meaning it. "Elena, baby, I've been looking everywhere for you. Why'd you change your number?" She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed, but the stranger's hand tightened around hers, just slightly, just enough that she felt the pressure like an anchor, and she heard the words she was supposed to say rising in her throat like they belonged to someone else. "I'm taken." Her voice came out rough. "Daniel, I'm with someone." Daniel laughed. It was the laugh she remembered, the one that started with his mouth and never reached his eyes, the one that meant he'd already decided not to believe what he was being told. He looked at the stranger across from her for the first time, really looked, and something happened in his face. A flicker, a stalling. The stranger hadn't moved. He hadn't stood up. He hadn't let go of her hand. He was just watching Daniel with the patient stillness of a man who'd been in this moment 1,000 times before, and Elena watched her ex-boyfriend's jaw work, watched the cocky set of his shoulders tighten, watched something like recognition cross his face, and then try to hide itself. "Who is this?" Daniel said. The stranger didn't answer him. He turned his gray eyes back to Elena and said, perfectly calm, "Do you want to finish your coffee? Or do you want to go home? Home. He'd said the word home like it was a place they shared. Elena's hand was shaking in his, but his was steady, and the steadiness of it was the only thing keeping her upright. Home, she whispered. The stranger nodded. He released her hand, slowly, deliberately, and he stood. He was taller than Daniel by half a head. He was broader through the shoulders. The charcoal suit fit him like it had been stitched to his body, and when he moved around the table to pull Elena's chair out for her, the movement was so fluid and unhurried that Daniel actually took a step back. Sweetheart, the stranger said, and he rested his hand on the small of Elena's back as she stood, light, barely there, a man claiming what he already had. Let's go. Daniel's voice came out sharper. Elena, who the hell is this guy? The stranger finally turned to look at him, and Elena saw something move behind those gray eyes, something that made Daniel's mouth stop working mid-sentence, something cold and measured and absolutely without fear. I'm the man she asked to take her home, the stranger said, and I'd like you to step back now. Daniel didn't step back. He was still trying to arrange his face into the cocky grin he'd used to bully every argument they'd ever had. Look, pal, you don't know what you're getting into. This girl and me, we have history. We have unfinished. Step back. The stranger said it exactly the same way he'd said it the first time. Same volume, same tone. And Daniel stepped back. Elena watched it happen and didn't understand how or why. Her ex-boyfriend, who had screamed in her face until she'd flinched, who had held her wrist so hard the skin had bruised in the shape of his fingers, who had told her once with a smile that no man would ever love her as much as he did, took 2 full steps backward because of something he'd seen in this stranger's face. The stranger guided Elena past him. His hand was still on her back. The pressure was steady, grounding, protective. They walked out of the coffee shop together and onto the rain-wet sidewalk, and Elena's legs felt like they belonged to somebody else. If you're already caught up in this story, hit that like button and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it means the world to me. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to them. The sky had gone that particular shade of gray that meant the rain wasn't finished yet. There was a black car parked at the curb. Not a cab, not a rideshare. A car, long and low and expensive, with windows tinted so dark they were almost opaque, and a driver who had stepped out the moment the stranger and Elena emerged from the coffee shop. The driver held the back door open. The stranger looked down at Elena. Get in the car, he said. And she didn't. She took half a step back and looked up at him, and her voice came out small and frightened in a way it hadn't been inside the coffee shop. I don't know you. I just asked you to pretend for 1 minute. I can't just get in a car with I know, he said. And then, more gently than she'd expected, you did the right thing in there. And I'm not asking you to come with me. I'm asking you to let my driver take you somewhere your ex doesn't know. He's watching us through the window right now. If you walk away on your own, he'll follow you. If you get in this car, he won't. Elena's stomach turned. She didn't want to turn her head, but she couldn't help it. She glanced back at the coffee shop, and there was Daniel pressed against the glass, his hands flat on the window, his face twisted with something that wasn't quite rage but was close enough to make her skin go cold. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She got in the car. It smelled like leather and something cleaner, something expensive. The stranger slid in beside her. The driver closed the door, walked around to the front, and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb before Elena could even fasten her seatbelt with her trembling fingers. She stared down at her lap. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The man beside her said nothing for a long time. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask her where she lived. He didn't reach for her. He just sat there in the quiet warmth of the car and let her shake. Finally, when she could speak without her voice cracking, she said, "Thank you. You're welcome. I don't do things like that. I don't just grab strangers. I've never. I know." "How do you know?" He turned his head. She looked up and met his eyes, and they were lighter in the daylight than they'd been in the coffee shop. The gray of them shot through with something almost silver. "Because no one sits down like you sat down unless they're running from something. I recognized it the moment I looked up. Where do you want me to take you?" She opened her mouth. She closed it. She realized, with a sinking feeling, that she didn't have an answer. Her apartment was 15 blocks away. Daniel didn't know it. She'd been so careful, but the thought of going there right now, of walking up her stairs and closing her door and being alone with the image of his face pressed against that coffee shop window, made her want to throw up. "I don't know," she said. I can't go home." Not yet. The man nodded like this was a reasonable answer. He didn't press her. He tapped twice on the glass divider between the back seat and the driver turned at the next light and headed somewhere that wasn't any direction Elena recognized. They drove in silence for a long time. The rain started again, soft at first, then harder, running down the tinted windows and sheets. Elena watched the city blur past and tried to understand what had just happened to her. The car pulled up in front of a small Italian restaurant tucked into a side street she'd never seen before. It had a dark green awning and gold lettering on the window, and the sign said it was closed. But the stranger stepped out, opened her door, and offered her his hand without speaking. She took it. Inside, the restaurant was warm and smelled like bread and garlic and rosemary, and an older man with silver hair hurried out from the back the moment they crossed the threshold. "Mr. Salvatore," he said, and then stopped because he'd seen Elena. He recovered in an instant. "Of course. Your usual table." Mr. Salvatore. That was the first piece of him she caught. The stranger Salvatore nodded at the older man and murmured something in Italian that Elena didn't catch. He guided her to a booth in the back corner, near the window, where the light was low and the street outside was just a smear of gray through the glass. He sat across from her. The older man returned with a carafe of water and a small basket of bread and disappeared back into the kitchen without being told, like he'd known to leave them alone. "You're safe here," Salvatore said. "I own the building. My driver's outside. No one walks in unless I say so. Take as long as you need." Elena wrapped her hands around her water glass. It was cold. It gave her something to hold. "You said your name was Salvatore?" she said. "That's not your first name." "Luca. Luca Salvatore." She tried it, the shape of it in her mouth. "Elena. Elena Vasquez." "Elena." He said it back to her, and he said it carefully, like he was testing whether she'd asked him not to. "Can I ask how long it's been? Since you left him?" She almost asked how he'd known she'd left, but she didn't have the energy to pretend she wasn't shaking. "For months." "And the mark on your wrist," he said quietly. "Is that from before you left, or since?" Elena looked down. She'd been so careful for 4 months. She'd worn long sleeves. She'd pulled them over her hands. She'd checked the mirror every morning before she left the apartment. But when she'd reached out in the coffee shop to grab her cappuccino, the sleeve of her sweater had ridden up, and there on the inside of her forearm, where the skin was pale and thin, was the yellowing remnant of a bruise in the shape of a hand. It had been 2 weeks old. She'd run into Daniel in a parking lot outside her new job. She hadn't known he was back in the city. He'd grabbed her arm. He'd told her she was making a mistake, trying to disappear. He'd said he could find her anywhere. She'd told Detective Morris at the precinct. He'd filed the report. Nothing had happened. She pulled her sleeve down. "Since," she said. Luca didn't react. He didn't say anything for a moment. And then, very quietly, he said, "He won't touch you again." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even said like a promise. It was said the way a man says the sun will come up tomorrow. It was said like it had already been decided. Elena looked at him. Really looked. She took in the charcoal suit and the white shirt open at the collar and the faint shadow along his jaw and the way his hands rested on the table, unmoving, palms down. There was a signet ring on his right hand. She could see the edge of a tattoo at the cuff of his left sleeve. He was beautiful in a way that didn't reassure her. He was beautiful the way a closed door is beautiful when you don't know what's behind it. "Who are you?" she asked. "I think you already know." "No, I don't. I'm a man who owns this restaurant, and the building it's in, and several others." He watched her carefully. "And I'm the man your ex-boyfriend recognized." Elena's stomach went cold. She had felt that moment in the coffee shop. She had seen the way Daniel's face had changed when he'd looked at Luca Salvatore. That flicker. The way he'd stepped back before the stranger had even finished his sentence. She'd thought it was fear of a physical fight, of getting hit, of some confrontation he was going to lose. But it wasn't that. Or it wasn't only that. Daniel had looked at this man and known him. "He knew you," she said slowly. "He didn't know me, but he knew what I was. There's a difference." "What?" She had to stop. She had to try again. "What are you?" "Nothing you need to be afraid of." She laughed. It came out wrong. Too high, too thin. "That's not an answer." "I know it isn't. But it's true. You're not in any danger from me, Elena. I don't hurt women. I don't hurt anyone who hasn't earned it." His gray eyes were steady. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded, because she couldn't form words. Why'd you pick me? She didn't understand the question at first. Then she did. There were other people in there. A woman with a baby. A kid in headphones. You walked past both of them. You came to me. Why? Elena opened her mouth and realized she didn't know. She'd done it on instinct. She'd scanned the room for someone Daniel wouldn't push past, someone solid, someone who looked like they could say no and mean it. She'd looked at the woman with the stroller and thought she couldn't drag a mother into this. She'd looked at the kid in headphones and known he wouldn't even hear her. And then she'd looked at the man in the charcoal suit reading a newspaper, and something in the way he sat, the stillness of him, the absolute unshakable quality of him at that table by the window, had pulled her across the room before she'd consciously decided to move. I don't know, she said. You look like you wouldn't back down. Luca Salvatore looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that she didn't have a name for. Then he nodded, once, and said, Finish your water. You need to eat something. Then I'll have my driver take you wherever you want to go. And after that, nothing. You asked me to pretend to know you. I pretended. The rest is up to you. He said it lightly. He said it like it was the end of something. But Elena could feel that it wasn't. She could feel it in the steadiness of his hands and the way his gaze kept drifting to her sleeve where the bruise had been. She could feel it in the word he'd said quietly, not as a promise, but as a fact. Won't. He won't touch you again. They ate. Or she ate. And he watched her eat, pushing a plate of bread and olive oil toward her when she wouldn't lift her fork, refilling her water glass twice. The older man who owned the restaurant brought out small bowls of soup without being asked, and a plate of pasta that Elena couldn't finish, and through all of it Luca Salvatore didn't ask her a single question about her life. He asked about the flower shop when she mentioned it. He asked what her favorite flower was. He listened when she said peonies, early summer, pale pink, and the way he listened made her feel like he was storing the answer somewhere important. She told herself she was being stupid. She told herself she was only still here because she was still shaking and the rain was still coming down, and she didn't want to walk out into the street and flag down a cab with her ex's face still pressed against the back of her mind. But that wasn't the whole truth. The truth was that for the first time in 4 months, she felt like she could exhale. The truth was that this man across the table, whoever he was, whatever he was, had stepped into the worst moment of her week and had made it stop. And when he finally said, quietly, I think you're ready, and stood up and guided her out of the restaurant and back to the car, a part of her, a part she wasn't proud of, didn't want to go. The driver took her home. She gave him the address with her voice shaking. Luca Salvatore didn't come into the car for the ride. He stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant in the rain, his hands in his coat pockets, and he watched her leave. At the last second, before the car pulled away, he leaned down to the open window and said, Elena. She looked up. If you ever need me to pretend again, he said, you won't have to ask twice. And he slipped a card onto the seat beside her. A plain white card. A single phone number printed across the front. No name. No address. Just the number. She held it in her lap the whole way home. She didn't call. She went into her apartment and locked both locks and the chain, and she stood with her back against the door for a long time. She put the card in the drawer of her nightstand, under a stack of old receipts, because even looking at it felt like standing too close to the edge of something. She took a shower. She stood under the water until it went cold. She sat on her couch and wrapped herself in a blanket and told herself she would never see Luca Salvatore again. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face pressed against the coffee shop window, his hands flat against the glass. But every time her heart started to race, she also saw something else. She saw a man in a charcoal suit lowering his newspaper. She saw gray eyes that had not even flickered. She saw a hand reaching across the table to take hers, warm and steady, and lips pressed to her knuckles, and a low voice saying, Tell him you're taken. And she thought, for the first time in 4 months, that maybe the person who'd been chasing her didn't own her anymore. The flower shop opened at 9. Elena was there by 7:30. She unlocked the back door with the key her boss had given her 3 months ago, let herself into the cold, damp space that smelled like wet paper and green stems, and started the morning routine that had kept her alive since she'd quit the bakery. Buckets out. Water changed. Roses trimmed at the diagonal and moved to the front case. Eucalyptus hung on the drying rack. It was repetitive work, quiet work, and it was the only thing in her life right now that made her feel normal. She'd made it through the worst hour of her year yesterday, and she was going to make it through today, and she was going to make it through tomorrow, and eventually the card in her nightstand drawer would stop being the first thing she thought about when she woke up. That was the plan. It worked for almost 2 hours. The bell over the door rang at 9:40, and Elena looked up from the counter where she was wrapping a bouquet for a regular, and the breath went out of her lungs. Daniel stood in the doorway of her flower shop. He was smiling. He was wearing his leather jacket. He had a small bouquet of grocery store roses in his hand. He said, "Hi, baby," like they were still together, like they'd just had a fight, and he was coming to make up, and Elena's body went so rigid, she almost dropped the ribbon she was holding. The regular customer, a woman in her 60s who came in every Thursday for her husband, looked between Elena and Daniel and said uncertainly, "Is everything all right, dear?" Elena couldn't speak. Daniel answered for her. "Everything's fine, ma'am. Just stopping by to see my girl." The word girl went through Elena like a cold knife. The regular customer's mouth tightened. She looked at Elena for a long second, and Elena saw the moment the woman understood, saw the flicker of worry cross her face. But there wasn't anything she could do. She paid. She took her flowers. She left. The bell over the door rang again behind her, and Elena was alone in the shop with her ex. "How'd you find me?" she whispered. "That's not important. Daniel, how did you find me?" He set the grocery store roses on the counter. He smiled that smile, the one that had no warmth in it. "Elena, baby, we need to talk about yesterday. Get out of my store. Whoever that guy was, you know he's not. Get out." "Do you know who he is?" Daniel said, and there was something in his voice now, something that wasn't quite the cocky confidence from yesterday, something like a warning. "That guy in the coffee shop. Do you know what he does for a living? Because if you don't, you should, because you're getting in way over your head, Elena, and I'm trying to help you." I said, "Get out." He didn't get out. He leaned across the counter. His hand came down hard on hers, pinning it to the wood, his fingers digging into her skin exactly the way they had in the parking lot 2 weeks ago, exactly the way they had in the kitchen of their old apartment the night she'd asked about the earrings. He pulled her close enough that she could smell the cigarettes on his breath. "You don't get to just walk away from me," he said, low and tight. "You don't get to just—" The bell over the door rang. Daniel didn't turn. He didn't let go of her wrist. He thought it was another customer. He thought he had another minute to make his point. Elena was the one who looked up. And there, standing in the doorway of her flower shop with rain on the shoulders of his charcoal coat, his gray eyes going very still as he took in Daniel's hand on her wrist, was Luca Salvatore. Daniel didn't see him at first. Elena saw the moment Luca's eyes dropped from her face to the hand on her wrist, and she saw something go cold and flat behind them, the way a lake goes flat right before the wind picks up. Luca didn't shout. He didn't move fast. He crossed the flower shop in the unhurried way she was already learning to recognize, the way a man walks when he knows no one in the room is going to stop him, and he came to a stop on the other side of the counter about 3 feet from where Daniel was still leaning over her. And then, very quietly, he said, "Let go of her." Daniel's head snapped up. Elena watched the color drain out of his face in real time. She watched the cocky twist of his mouth fall apart. She watched his grip on her wrist loosen. Not because he wanted to let go, but because his fingers had forgotten they were supposed to be holding on. "You," Daniel said. "Let go of her wrist, step back from the counter, and walk out of this shop." Luca's voice hadn't gone up. It hadn't gone down. It was the same voice he'd used yesterday to order her coffee, the same voice he'd used to tell her she was safe in his restaurant. But Daniel's hand came off her wrist like he'd touched a hot stove, and he straightened up, and he put his hands up in that half-surrender, half-appeal gesture she hated so much. Okay. Look, I'm just talking to my girlfriend. Man, we were having a conversation. She's not your girlfriend." She's not your girlfriend," Luca said again, exactly the same way. "She hasn't been your girlfriend for 4 months. And if you're still confused about that, I'm going to help you understand it right now." He took 1 step forward. Just one. Daniel took 3 steps back. Elena's wrist was throbbing where Daniel's fingers had pressed into it. She cradled it against her chest, and she watched the 2 men across her counter, and she realized she was holding her breath. Luca didn't look at her. He was watching Daniel with a stillness that was somehow more frightening than any shouting she had ever heard. "You came into her place of work," Luca said quietly. "You put your hand on her, in front of a witness, in a space she considers safe." He paused. Do you know who I am yet? Daniel swallowed. He tried for a laugh, and it came out as a cough. Look, I didn't know she was with I didn't know you two were. You didn't ask. You didn't care. You saw her with another man yesterday, and you came here today to remind her who she belongs to. Luca's gray eyes didn't move. Tell me I'm wrong. Daniel didn't tell him he was wrong. Walk out of this shop, Luca said. Don't come back. Don't drive past the windows. Don't send anyone to check on her. Don't call the phone number you've been calling. Don't look for her new one. You're going to forget that Elena Vasquez exists, and if you can't forget, you're going to learn to keep that to yourself. Or what? Daniel said it too fast. It came out without him meaning to say it, the kind of reflexive pushback that men like him couldn't stop themselves from giving, and Elena watched his face go through 3 different expressions before it settled on a thin, forced bravado. Or nothing, Lucas said. That's what I want you to understand. I'm not threatening you. I don't threaten people. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You're going to walk out that door, and the rest of your life is going to be the consequence of whether or not you listen to me right now. Daniel stared at him. For a long, suspended second, he didn't move. Elena saw him trying to calculate, trying to find the angle, trying to figure out whether he was being bluffed by a man in a nice coat. And she saw the moment he decided he wasn't. She saw his throat work. She saw his eyes drop. He grabbed the little bouquet of grocery store roses off the counter, and then he must have thought better of taking anything from this place, because he set them back down, and he walked out of the flower shop without looking at her once. The bell over the door rang. The door clicked shut, and Elena Vasquez stood behind her counter, holding her bruised wrist against her chest, and started to cry. She didn't mean to. She had been holding it for so long that her body simply did it on its own, a collapse that started at her shoulders and worked its way through her whole torso, and she turned away from Luca because she didn't want him to see, but he was already moving. He came around the counter. He didn't touch her. He just came to a stop beside her and stood there, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and he said, "Breathe, Elena. In. Slower. Out." She breathed. Her hands were shaking so badly that when she tried to wipe her face, her knuckles caught her own cheekbone. Luca gently took her wrist, the one Daniel had grabbed, and he turned it over in his hands. The skin was already going red. There were going to be fingerprints on it by tonight. He looked at the mark, and then he looked at her face, and he didn't say anything for a long moment. But Elena could feel the temperature in the room shift around him the way heat rises off pavement. "How did you know?" she whispered. "How did you know to come here?" "I didn't," he said. "I came to buy peonies." She laughed. It came out wet and broken and a little bit hysterical. "You came to buy peonies. You said yesterday they were your favorite. I know a woman who's getting married next week. I thought I'd send her some." He was still holding her wrist, very gently. "I didn't know he'd found you here. He wasn't supposed to. I know. My boss hired me under my middle name. I don't post anything online. I paid my last month at my old apartment in cash. I've been so careful, and I know, Elena. How does he keep finding me?" Luca looked at her. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "That's a question I'm going to find the answer to." She didn't know what that meant, but she could feel the shape of it, the weight of it, the way the sentence landed in the room like something heavy being set down on a table. Luca let go of her wrist. He turned, still calm, still unhurried, and he walked to the front of the shop and flipped the little sign on the door from open to closed. He locked the deadbolt. He came back. "You're closing for the day," he said. "You're going to call your boss and tell her you're sick. And then you and I are going to have a different kind of conversation than the one we had yesterday." Elena looked up at him. "What kind?" "The kind where I stop pretending I can walk out of this and let you handle it alone." They sat in the back office of the flower shop. It was a small room, cluttered with invoices and ribbon spools and a half-dead pothose on the filing cabinet. Luca pulled out the extra chair from behind the desk for her and sat across from her in the other one. And Elena called her boss and lied about food poisoning. And her boss said she sounded terrible and to take tomorrow off too if she needed it. When Elena hung up, her hands were steadier. Not steady, steadier. Luca was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Tell me about him," he said. "Daniel." "Yes. What do you want to know?" "Everything you're comfortable telling me." She told him. She hadn't told anyone the whole story. Not her mother, not Detective Morris, not the victim's advocate who'd given her a pamphlet and a list of shelters and a look of professional sympathy. She told him about meeting Daniel at 23, at a birthday party for a girl she'd worked with at the bakery. She told him about the first year, the good year, the flowers and the weekend trips, and the way he'd told her she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever met. She told him about the second year, the small things, the way he'd started checking her phone, the way he'd stopped liking her friends, the way he'd told her her uniform at the bakery made her look cheap, and could she please just quit and let him take care of her. She told him about the night in the kitchen with the earrings. She told him about the slap. She told him about the 6 months after that, where she'd convinced herself she'd imagined how bad it was, where she'd told herself he was working on it, where she'd taken the bruises he gave her and put long sleeves over them and gone to work and smiled. She told him about the morning she'd packed a bag and left. She told him about the parking lot 2 weeks ago. She told him about the report that had gone nowhere. Luca listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod sympathetically. He didn't do any of the things that people had done when she tried to tell parts of this story before, the little gestures of understanding that had always felt like they were trying to manage her emotions for her. He just listened, and when she was done, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "What's his last name?" "Marchetti." Luca's face didn't change, but something did. Some small thing behind his eyes, a flicker of calculation, a recalibration. "What?" Elena said. "Nothing." "No. You reacted to that." "What?" "Daniel Marchetti. Early 30s. Leather jacket. Works." Luca paused. "What does he do for work?" "He runs a bar. Off of Fulton. The Low Key. It's his uncle's place, but Daniel manages it. I know the bar." "You know it." "I know it," Luca said. And that was all he said. Elena stared at him. He's nothing." Luca said it flatly, with a kind of dismissal in his voice that was almost worse than anger. "His uncle owes money to people who owe money to people I know. That's all. Daniel Marchetti is a small man in a small room at the edge of something much bigger than him, and he doesn't know it. But it explains how he's been finding you." "What do you mean?" "It means he's been asking favors from people who shouldn't be granting them. And those people are about to learn that." He stood up. He pulled his phone from the inside pocket of his coat. "Stay here. I need to make a call." He stepped out of the office. Elena sat at the desk in the back of her flower shop, holding her bruised wrist in her lap, and she listened to the low murmur of his voice through the door, and she thought about the way he'd said Daniel Marchetti's name. Like he'd already filed it. Like he'd already decided what was going to happen next. If you're as deep into this story as I am right now, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. I upload new stories every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Your support is the reason I keep going. Now, back to them. He came back into the office 5 minutes later. He sat down across from her. "Here's what's happening," he said. "You're going to go home tonight. My driver will take you. There's going to be a man named Matteo outside your building from now on. He drives a dark blue sedan. He doesn't come inside. He doesn't follow you around. He sits in his car, and he watches the street. If Daniel Marchetti or anyone else comes near the building, Matteo handles it. You don't have to talk to him. You don't have to acknowledge him. You just have to know he's there." Elena opened her mouth, closed it. "Why are you doing this?" "Because no one else is going to. You don't know me. I know enough." "Luca." She used his name for the first time. It sat in the air between them. This is too much. I can't owe you something like this. I don't have anything to give you. You don't owe me anything. Everyone wants something." "Elena." He leaned forward slightly, and his voice dropped, and she realized she was looking into his eyes in a way she hadn't let herself all day. "I am not Daniel. I am not every man you have met since you left him. I am not doing this because I want a piece of you. I am doing this because I was sitting in a coffee shop yesterday reading the paper, and a woman I had never seen in my life crossed a room and asked me to pretend I loved her for 1 minute. And I watched her ex-boyfriend step back from me, and I understood what I was looking at. And I went to sleep last night, and I woke up this morning, and I couldn't make myself read the rest of the paper until I knew you were safe." Elena's eyes filled. She tried to look down. He didn't let her. "I don't need anything from you," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust me all at once. I'm telling you what I'm going to do, and you can decide whether you want it. Matteo outside your building. My number in your phone. The card from yesterday. Did you keep it?" "Yes." "Good. Put my number in your phone. Under any name you want. If he comes near you again. If anyone comes near you again. If you see a car on your street you don't recognize. If you hear a sound in your hallway that doesn't feel right. You call me. You don't call the police. You don't text your mother. You call me. Elena nodded. She couldn't speak. One more thing, Lucas said. She waited. I'd like you to come to dinner tomorrow night. At my restaurant. The one you were at yesterday. Not a date. I want to tell you some things about me. The things I should have told you yesterday and didn't, because you were still shaking and I didn't want to add to it. You have a right to know who you've let into your life, and I'd rather you hear it from me than find it on the internet. What kind of things? The kind of things you're already guessing. He said it gently. Will you come? She thought about it for a long moment. And then she thought about the way Daniel's hand had felt on her wrist 20 minutes ago, and she thought about the way this man across from her had made that hand let go without ever raising his voice, and she said, yes. She did not sleep that night, but it was a different kind of not sleeping than it had been for the last 4 months. She was not lying awake waiting for Daniel's fist to come through her door. She was lying awake thinking about the man who had just called her a cab and paid for it, and told her driver where to take her, and stood on a sidewalk in the rain to watch her pull away for the second time in 2 days. She was lying awake thinking about the way he had said the kind of things you're already guessing. She was lying awake thinking about how much of her life she had spent being careful, and how tired she was, and how badly she wanted to be able to set down the thing she had been carrying for 4 months and let someone else hold it for one single night. In the morning, she looked out her window before she made coffee. A dark blue sedan sat on the street half a block down, engine off. A man in the driver's seat with a paper coffee cup in his hand. He wasn't looking at her window. He wasn't looking at her door. He was watching the intersection at the corner, and the alley, and the rooftops. He had the patient, alert posture of a man who had done this before. Elena watched him for a long time. She did not wave. He did not look up. But when a delivery van slowed down outside her building, his head turned, and his hand went to something under the seat, and he waited until the van pulled away and turned the corner before he relaxed again. She made her coffee. She drank it standing at the window. For the first time in 4 months, she did not feel like she was being hunted. She felt like someone was standing between her and the thing that had been hunting her. And she felt something she had not expected to feel at all, which was that she wanted to see him again. Not because she needed his protection, but because yesterday, in the back room of her flower shop, a man she barely knew had let her tell the truth about her life. And he had not tried to fix her, and he had not tried to make it smaller, and he had not tried to tell her she should have left sooner. He had just listened. And at the end he had stood up and made one phone call and turned her world from a place where she was running into a place where she was standing still. The restaurant was warmer in the evening than it had been in the afternoon. The dining room was about half full when Elena arrived. Couples at candlelit tables, a family in the corner, an older couple at the bar sharing a bottle of red. The same older man who had greeted them yesterday met her at the door, and when she said her name, he didn't even check the reservation book. He just smiled and said, Mr. Salvatore is at his table. May I take your coat? She'd worn the only nice thing she owned. A dark green wrap dress she'd had since before Daniel. She'd almost changed 3 times. She'd almost canceled. The older man led her to the same booth in the back. Lucas stood when he saw her. He was wearing a black suit tonight, a white shirt, no tie. His hair was a little damp at the temples like he'd come straight from somewhere. He looked at her, and something passed over his face that he controlled quickly, but not quickly enough. You came, he said. You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. She sat down. I'm still not sure I should have. That's fair. He sat across from her. The older man returned with a bottle of wine that Luca must have ordered ahead of time, a red, and he poured for both of them. Elena took a sip, and it was the best wine she had ever tasted, and she set the glass down and said, Tell me the things you were going to tell me. He did. He didn't make her wait. He didn't make her small talk through the appetizer. He started talking the moment the older man had moved away, and he talked for a long time, quietly, evenly, without dramatizing any of it. He told her that his family had come to this country 3 generations ago. He told her that his grandfather had owned the building they were sitting in, and the 4 buildings on either side of it, and a construction company, and a trucking company, and several things that were not listed publicly. He told her that his father had inherited those things, and that his father had died 6 years ago, and that he had been 31 years old when he had found himself responsible for men who had worked for his family longer than he had been alive. He told her that the businesses he ran now were, most of them, legal. He told her that some of them were not. He told her what the ones that were not did. He did not dress it up. He did not ask her to understand it. He told her about the shipping. He told her about the construction contracts that weren't really about construction. He told her about the understanding his family had with 3 other families in this city, and about the men who had tried to come into the neighborhoods his family protected and had been turned away. He did not tell her that he had killed anyone. He did not tell her that he had not. He told her that the version of the world she lived in was a version his family helped make possible for the people they counted as theirs, and that the price of that was paid in ways she would never see on the news. Elena listened. She drank her wine slowly. She did not look away from him. When he was finished, he said, "That's who I am. That's what you've been sitting across from for 2 dinners. I wanted you to know before this went any further, because I think it might go further, and I don't want you making a decision based on a man I'm not." She didn't say anything for a long time. Luca waited. He didn't prompt her. He didn't soften it. He just sat across from her with his hands resting on the table, palms down, and let her think. Finally, she said, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I am not going to lie to you. Most men in your position wouldn't tell me any of it. Most men in my position aren't in my position." He paused. "And because if Daniel comes back, and he might come back, what I do about it is not going to look like what a normal man would do. I want you to know that before it happens, not after. You should be able to choose." "Choose what?" "Whether you want me anywhere near your life." Elena picked up her wine. She took a small sip. Her hand wasn't shaking. She noticed that and filed it away. "What do you mean? What you do about it is not going to look like what a normal man would do." Luca watched her carefully. "I mean that when I tell you he won't touch you again, I am not speaking aspirationally." She set the glass down. "Are you going to kill him?" "No." He said it flatly. "I don't kill a man over what he's done to you, because what he's done to you is something I can fix without killing him. But I am going to make sure that every door he has ever walked through is closed. He's going to lose his uncle's bar. He's going to lose the apartment his friend is letting him stay in. The men he's been leaning on to find you are going to stop picking up his calls. And if I find out, and I will find out, that he's asked a single one of them for one more favor, he and I are going to have a conversation that he isn't going to enjoy. But he's going to walk away from it. Alive. And changed." Elena stared at him. "Why? Why what? Why not just?" She couldn't say it. "Because you don't want that. And because I don't want you to spend the rest of your life with a man's death on your conscience, whether you asked for it or not. There's a line, Elena. I know where mine is. I'm telling you where it is so you know it's there." She exhaled. She realized she'd been holding her breath. "And if you decide you don't want me near your life," he continued, "I'll pull Matteo off your building tomorrow morning. I'll have a different man, someone who doesn't work for me, watch your block for 2 more weeks, because you still deserve that. And I won't contact you again." She looked down at the tablecloth, at her own hands, at the faint yellow edge of the bruise on her wrist, and the newer red shape of Daniel's fingers half an inch above it. "I don't want you to pull him off," she said. Luca waited. I don't know what I want yet. I don't know what this is. I don't know what you want from me. Even though you keep saying you don't want anything, and I don't trust that. Not all the way, not yet. I can't. I've been trusting the wrong person for 2 years, and I don't have that part of me working right anymore. I know, but I don't want you to go away." Luca didn't smile. He didn't look triumphant. He just nodded, once, a small acknowledgement, and he said, "Then I won't." They ate. He did not push her to talk. He asked her about the flower shop. She asked him about his grandfather. She laughed, once, at something he said about an old woman who ran a bakery 3 doors down from the restaurant, and who had been trying to get him to marry her granddaughter for 8 years. The laugh surprised her. She hadn't heard herself laugh in a long time. When it was time to leave, Lucas stood with her and helped her into her coat and walked her to the front of the restaurant, and when they stepped outside, his car was waiting at the curb with the driver she was beginning to recognize. But Luca didn't open the door right away. He stood beside her on the sidewalk, and the rain was soft tonight, and he said, "Elena." "Yes. There's something I need to tell you about tomorrow." "What about tomorrow?" "I'm going to be seen with you. In public. Someplace people who know me will notice. It's not for me, and it isn't for you. It's for him. I want Daniel Marchetti to hear within 48 hours that you are with me. Not a rumor. Not a man you brushed past in a coffee shop. With me. I want that to be the thing that reaches him before anything else I do." She felt her stomach go tight. "What does that mean with you?" "It means I'm going to tell the people who need to know that you're under my protection. It means, if anyone asks, I'm not going to correct them when they assume more than that." It means your name is going to start showing up in rooms where it hasn't been before, and I want you to know that before it happens. Luca, I'm not claiming you, Elena. I would never do that. I'm drawing a line around you. It's a difference that matters, and I want to be sure you understand it. She swallowed. Will it make me safer? Yes. Will it make me more of a target? From Daniel, no. From other people, possibly. But if anyone with any sense hears my name attached to yours, they won't test it. That's what I'm counting on. She looked up at him. The rain was catching in his hair. She nodded. Then draw your line, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. And then, very slowly, he lifted his hand and brushed his thumb against her cheek where a drop of rain had landed, and he let it drop away. Tomorrow night, he said. I'll send the car at 8. She got in the car. The driver closed the door. She watched Luca Salvatore through the tinted glass until the car turned the corner and the restaurant and the man on the sidewalk were both gone. The next night, he took her to a gala. She had never been to a gala in her life. It was at a hotel downtown, a charity fundraiser for a children's hospital, and the dress that arrived at her apartment that afternoon had come in a box with a note that said only Luca. The dress was dark red, long, plain, the kind of plain that was not plain at all. When she put it on, she didn't recognize herself. Matteo drove her to the hotel. When the car pulled up under the portico, Luca was waiting outside. He was in a black tuxedo. He came around to open her door himself before the valet could reach it, and he offered her his hand, and when she stepped out he tucked her arm into his and did not let go. The ballroom was full of people, men in tuxedos and women in dresses that cost more than Elena's car. The moment Luca walked in with her, she felt the room notice. A shift, not a pause, just a shift, heads turning and conversations adjusting, and eyes flicking to her and then away. A woman in silver crossed to them almost immediately. Mid-50s, elegant, with the warm eyes of someone who had known Luca for a long time. Luca, darling. And who is this? Rosa, this is Elena. Elena, Rosa has been my mother's closest friend since before I was born. Elena. Rosa took her hand. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes were very, very sharp. I've never seen Luca bring a woman to this. Ever. Rosa, I'm just making an observation, sweetheart. She smiled at Elena with something that was not quite a blessing, but was something like the warm edge of one. Whoever you are, you must be very special. Welcome. She drifted away. Elena looked up at Luca. What did that mean? It meant that by midnight, everyone in this room will know who you are, and by tomorrow morning, everyone they know will know too. Which is what we came here for. Oh, he looked down at her. She had not let go of his arm, and he had not made her. You don't have to stay if it's too much, he said. I'll stay. They circulated. He introduced her to people she would not remember the names of. A city councilman, a man who owned 3 hotels, a woman whose husband had built half the high-rises along the waterfront and who studied Elena for a beat too long before she smiled. A priest, 2 lawyers, an older man with very white hair who clapped Luca on the shoulder and said something in Italian that made Luca laugh, and then looked at Elena and said, in English, "You be good to him, young lady. He does not bring people here." Elena nodded, not knowing what else to do. Through all of it, Luca stayed at her elbow. His hand found the small of her back when a crowd pressed close. His fingers brushed hers when he handed her a glass of champagne. He did not once pretend to know her less than he was pretending to know her. He was drawing his line, and he was doing it slowly, deliberately, in full view of every person in the room whose opinion would matter tomorrow. Halfway through the evening, during a lull, he leaned down and murmured in her ear, "Come with me." He guided her out of the ballroom, down a quiet hallway, to a small balcony overlooking the hotel's interior courtyard. The rain had stopped. The courtyard below was full of trees strung with small white lights. "I wanted to give you a minute," he said. "I could see it in your shoulders." She laughed shakily. "Am I that obvious?" "Only to me." She turned to him. She was standing very close to him, closer than she had let herself stand yet, and the dark red of her dress caught the low light from the courtyard, and Luca's face was half in shadow, and she heard herself say, "Why me?" "Elena, no. I need to know. I've been trying to figure it out for 3 days. There are 100 women in that room who would have come out here with you tonight if you'd asked. I saw at least 6 of them looking at you, Luca. So why me? Why the woman with the bruised wrist and the ex-boyfriend in the apartment she's terrified to go home to? Why?" Luca was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "Because when you sat down at my table 2 days ago, you were the bravest person I'd seen in a long time." She stared at him. "I wasn't brave. I was panicking. You were both. Luca, you walked into a room full of strangers, and you picked the one who looked like he might be able to help you. And you asked for exactly what you needed. You didn't cry. You didn't apologize for asking. You didn't waste a single word. You saw a problem coming, and you solved it with the only tool you had, which was a man in a charcoal suit reading a newspaper." He paused. "I have lived in a world full of powerful men my entire life, Elena. I have almost never seen anyone do what you did. Most people who are afraid freeze. You moved." He lifted his hand. He did not touch her. He held it a breath away from her cheek, and he waited for her to close the distance if she wanted to. She did. She tilted her face into his palm. His hand was warm. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "Why me is the wrong question," he said quietly. "The question is why not? And I don't have an answer for that. I just know I don't want there to be one." They did not kiss. She almost thought he would. She could feel him deciding not to. She could feel him setting it down on a shelf for later, for a time when she had not spent the last 4 months flinching away from a man's hand. He lowered his palm. He stepped back. He offered her his arm. "Ready to go back in," he said. "Yes." They went back in. They stayed another hour. When they left, a photographer she hadn't noticed took a picture of them on the hotel's front steps, and Elena did not know it yet. But that picture would be on a society page by tomorrow morning. And a man named Daniel Marchetti, sitting in his uncle's bar nursing a drink and wondering why 3 of his usual contacts had stopped answering his calls, would look up at the television above the bar and see her face. He would see Luca Salvatore's hand at the small of her back. He would see the way she was looking at the man beside her, and he would understand, very quickly and very badly, the kind of line that had been drawn around her. He would reach for his phone, and his phone would not ring out the way it used to, because by then the line was already drawn, and everyone on the other side of it had agreed to respect it. Everyone, except him. Luca didn't move at first. He just stood in the doorway with the rain still glittering on his shoulders and the bell over the door still trembling from his entrance, and his gray eyes tracked the whole scene with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. He looked at Daniel's hand on Elena's wrist. He looked at Elena's face. He looked at the grocery store roses crushed half underneath their joined hands on the counter. And then, very quietly, he said, "Let go of her." Daniel turned. His face went through 3 different expressions in the space of a second: confusion, recognition, and then a kind of cornered animal panic that Elena had never seen on him before. His hand released her wrist so fast it was like the skin had burned him. He took a step back from the counter. He put his palms up, and for the first time in the 2 years Elena had known him, Daniel Marchetti looked small. "Hey," Daniel said. "Hey, man, look, I didn't know." "She didn't say I was just talking to my, she's not yours." Luca said it without raising his voice. He didn't need to. The words filled the little flower shop the way smoke fills a room. "Walk outside. My driver is in the car at the curb. Get in the back seat." "Wait." "I don't." "Get in the car." Daniel looked at Elena. For half a second something of the old Daniel flickered behind his eyes: the rage, the ownership, the refusal to accept that anyone could take from him what he considered his. But whatever he saw on Luca's face extinguished it. He walked out of the flower shop on legs that didn't seem to belong to him. And through the window, Elena watched him climb into the back of the long black car the way he'd watched her climb into it yesterday. And she thought, with a strange, distant clarity, that she had never seen anyone look so afraid in her life. The bell stopped ringing. The shop went quiet. Luca turned to her. He took 3 slow steps to the counter, his coat still wet, his hands empty at his sides, and he stopped before he got too close. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for the wrist Daniel had been holding. He just looked at her, and his voice came out gentler than she had any reason to expect. "Let me see." Elena pulled her sleeve up. The skin on her inner wrist was already pinking, already starting to show the outline of a grip. Luca looked at it for a long time without moving. He didn't say anything. His jaw worked once, twice. Then he pulled a clean handkerchief from his inside pocket, dampened it with water from the little sink behind her counter, and pressed it against her wrist with the kind of careful, deliberate tenderness that felt so completely at odds with the temperature of his eyes that Elena almost broke down right there. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For I don't know. For bringing you into this." "For Elena." He said her name like a correction, like a line in the sand. You didn't bring me into anything. I walked in, and I'm going to tell you something now, and I want you to listen to me. She looked up. His gray eyes were steady on hers. That man is not going to come into this shop again, or your apartment, or anywhere near you. Not today, not tomorrow, not in 6 months. Do you understand? You can't, I can. He said it so simply, so flatly, that there was no arguing with it. And I will. But I need you to say yes, Elena. I need you to tell me that you want this over. She thought, later, that the moment he asked her that question was the moment everything turned. Because he could have done it without asking. He could have walked out of the shop and into the car and handled Daniel the way men like him handled things, and she would have been safe, and she never would have had to know. But he'd looked at her across the counter with her wrists still pink from another man's fingers, and he'd asked her permission. Yes, she said. Yes, I want it over. Luca nodded once. Then it's over. He turned toward the door. He was halfway there when Elena heard herself speak again. Wait. He stopped. What are you going to do to him? Luca turned back. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him decide something, watched him weigh her face against some private scale she couldn't read. Then he said, quietly, nothing you need to be afraid of. He's not going to be hurt, but he's going to be told, very clearly, that you're under my protection. And he's going to leave this city. And he's going to understand that if he comes back ever, I'll know the moment he crosses the county line. Why? The word came out cracked. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. I walked up to your table. I said one sentence. Why? Because I told you yesterday, he said. You asked me to pretend I knew you. I pretended. That's the whole story. That's not the whole story. No, he said after a moment. It isn't. But it's all I can tell you right now. And he walked out of the shop, and through the window Elena watched him cross the sidewalk and get into the back of the long black car with Daniel already inside. And she watched the car pull smoothly into the rain and disappear around the corner of the block. Her hands started shaking again. This time she let them. She closed the shop. She locked the front door and turned the sign to closed and walked into the back room and sat on the cold concrete floor among the buckets of water and the trimmed stems, and she put her face in her hands and cried for the first time in weeks. She wasn't crying because she was afraid. She was crying because for the first time since she'd left Daniel 4 months ago, she wasn't afraid, and the relief of it was physically unbearable. Her phone buzzed in her pocket 40 minutes later. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. He's on a train, Lucas said, without preamble. He's not coming back. His lease on his apartment was terminated this morning. His employer has been told he won't be returning. His family has been told where he's gone and why. He understands what will happen if he tries to contact you. Elena closed her eyes. Just like that. Just like that. And what do I owe you? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Lucas said, very quietly, nothing. You don't owe me anything, Elena. I want you to hear me say that. You don't owe me coffee. You don't owe me dinner. You don't owe me a thank you call. You owe me nothing. If I never see you again, the only thing that will have happened is that a man who should have been stopped 4 months ago has been stopped. Do you understand me? She understood him. And that was the problem. Because a man who asked her for nothing, who had stepped into the worst moment of her year twice now, and who had looked at her across a coffee shop table and across a flower shop counter, as if she were something worth protecting, that kind of man was more dangerous to the careful walls she had built around herself than Daniel Marchetti had ever been. I understand, she said. Good. Luca. Yes. Thank you. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, lock your doors tonight. Sleep. I'll check on you tomorrow. And the line went dead. He did check on her the next day. Not in person. A small delivery arrived at the flower shop just after she opened a heavy brown paper parcel with her name written on it in a careful, angular hand. Inside was a book, a novel she'd mentioned liking, in passing, at the restaurant 2 nights ago. He'd remembered. There was no note. The day after, a small arrangement of peonies arrived at her apartment door when she came home from work. Pale pink. Early summer. Her favorite. No card. She knew. On the 4th day, nothing came. On the 5th day, nothing came. On the 6th day, she stood at the counter of the flower shop and looked at the phone in her hand for almost an hour before she dialed the number on the plain white card she'd moved from the nightstand drawer to her wallet. He picked up on the second ring. Elena, I don't know why I called. That's all right. She swallowed. I wanted to say thank you. For the book. And the flowers. And I just wanted to say it out loud. Because writing it in a text felt like I was trying to keep you at a distance, and I don't." She stopped. She didn't know how to finish that sentence. "Have dinner with me," he said. "No strings. Same restaurant. Tonight. I'll send a car at 7. If you don't want to come, don't get in. No pressure. No follow-up. No disappointment on my end. But if you do want to come, Elena, I'd like to see you." She got in the car at 7. The restaurant was the same as it had been that first day, warm, smelling of bread and rosemary, with the older man with silver hair nodding respectfully as she walked through the door. Luca was already at the corner booth. He stood when she entered. He had traded the charcoal suit for something softer, dark trousers, a black sweater, and in the low light, he looked younger than he had in the coffee shop, less carved from stone, more like a man than a threat. He didn't kiss her. He didn't touch her. He pulled out her chair, waited until she was seated, and sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either. What made you decide?" She thought about lying. She thought about saying something polite and safe. Then she looked at him across the table and thought, "This man asked me for permission before he took a dangerous man out of my life." And she said, "I'm tired of being afraid of things that might be good for me." Something moved behind Luca's gray eyes. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth softened in a way she'd never seen before, and he said, "Then let's eat. And we can talk about anything you want to talk about, or nothing at all." If you're as deep into this story as I am right now, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. I upload new stories every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Your support is the reason I keep going. Now, back to them. They talked about nothing at first. They talked about the flower shop. They talked about the owner, a widow named Graciela who'd hired Elena because she'd seen something in her she hadn't put into words. They talked about the peonies and how they bruised if you breathed on them wrong. Luca listened the way he had that first day completely, without interrupting, as if the details of her ordinary life were the most interesting thing he'd encountered in years. And slowly, across a plate of pasta Elena barely touched, and a glass of wine she sipped carefully, the walls she'd built since the coffee shop started to come down a little at a time. She told him about her mother, who had died when Elena was 17, and who had raised her alone in a small apartment with a leaky ceiling and a garden that lived on the fire escape. She told him about the scholarship that had taken her to culinary school and the bakery job that had followed, and the way she had met Daniel at a Christmas party thrown by a friend of a friend. She told him how it had started the way they all start, flowers and attentiveness, and the feeling of being chosen, and how it had turned, the first time, into a slap so unexpected she hadn't even raised her hand or her face afterward because her brain hadn't caught up to what had happened. She told him about the second time and the third time and the way she had stopped counting. She told him about the kitchen and the earrings and the police report that had gone nowhere. She told him about the 4 months of running. And Luca listened. He didn't flinch. He didn't make the face people made when they heard these kinds of stories, the pity face, the one that made her feel like something already broken. He just listened, and when she finally ran out of words, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and his palm was warm and his grip was steady, and he said, "I'm sorry no one was there." It was such a simple sentence. She had never heard anyone say it to her before. "Tell me something about you," she said when she could speak again. "Something real. Not," she gestured at the restaurant, "not the suit and the driver and the table in the back. Something real." Luca was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I had a brother. He died when I was 22. I was the one who was supposed to be in the car that night. He took my place because I was sick." He looked down at his glass. "My father, he ran what I run now, and he blamed me for my brother's death until the day he died. Not out loud, but in every room we were ever in together. Luca, and I told myself for a long time that the reason I took over the business when my father was gone was because it was expected. But that wasn't the reason." He lifted his eyes to her. "The reason was that I thought if I could make it all run right, if I could make it all mean something, then maybe I could earn back a brother I hadn't earned the right to lose. And that's a terrible reason to do anything. And it took me a long time to know that." Elena's throat was tight. "Does it help? Sometimes. Does it hurt? Always?" She turned her hand over under his, so that their palms were pressed together. "I don't know what this is," she said quietly. "I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what you are. I don't know what I'm doing. But I want you to know that I see you. I see the man who asked me before he did anything. That man. Whatever else you are, I see him, and he's real, and I'm not going to pretend he isn't. Luca's hand tightened on hers. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was rougher than it had been all night. I don't want anything from you, Elena. I want you to be safe. I want you to sleep. I want you to be able to walk into that flower shop in the morning without looking over your shoulder. And if, somewhere in all of that, you ever want more from me, then I'm here. But not a second before you're ready. Do you understand me? Yes. Good, he said. And he raised her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles, the same way he had in the coffee shop. Except this time, it wasn't a performance for anyone. This time the restaurant was empty and the rain was ticking on the window, and there was no one to see. And Elena understood, with a quiet certainty that settled into her chest like a weight, that whatever was happening between them had already begun in the coffee shop a week ago, and that she had been lying to herself every minute since that she had any intention of walking away. That week bled into the next one. Luca did not push. Luca did not appear at her flower shop or her apartment unannounced. He called once a day, sometimes twice. He sent a car when she had a long shift and would be closing the shop alone at night. He asked, every single time, before he did anything, and Elena began to realize that this was not romance the way she had understood romance before. This was not the breathless rush of Daniel Marchetti's first 3 months, the flowers and the grand gestures and the constant pressure to say yes to more and more and more. This was something slower and heavier. This was a man who had made a decision about her in the first 30 seconds of seeing her and who was content to wait as long as it took for her to make her own. She started sleeping through the night. Small things. Small returns of herself. She started humming in the flower shop again. She started cooking real dinners in her apartment instead of eating crackers on the couch. She started noticing, for the first time in 4 months, that her hands did not shake when she turned the key in her front door. She started noticing, too, the man in the dark coat who stood at the end of her block every evening from 6 to 10. She saw him the first night and her stomach lurched and she almost called the police. Then she recognized the shape of him, the way he stood. She had seen him at the restaurant. He was one of Luca's. She called Luca. There's a man, she said. He's not bothering me. I just want to know. His name is Tomas. He's there because the block has bad lighting and you come home after dark. He will never speak to you. He will never approach you. The moment you tell me you don't want him there, he's gone. Is he armed? Yes. She closed her eyes. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass of her apartment window. Leave him there, she said quietly. For now. Graciela noticed something the second week. Graciela was 67 years old and had survived a husband who'd hit her for 15 years before she'd left him in 1987, and Graciela missed nothing. She watched Elena through the back archway of the shop for an entire morning on a Tuesday, and then she came out from behind the cold case with her hands on her hips and said, "Who is he?" Elena froze. Who's who? The man who's putting color back in your face. The one who sent that car last Thursday. I'm old, Mija, not blind. Elena tried to say it was nothing. Then she tried to say it was complicated. Then she gave up, because Graciela was looking at her with the kind of patient, unamused expression that had presumably worked on 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. His name is Luca, Elena said. He's the reason Daniel is gone. Graciela's eyes sharpened. Gone how? Gone away. From the city. By his own choice, or not by his own choice. Graciela looked at her for a long time. Then she reached out and took Elena's hand, and her hand was thin and dry and strong, and she said, Listen to me, Mija. I don't care what this man does. I don't care if he prints counterfeit money and sells guns to the devil. I care about one thing only. Does he look at you like you are a person, or does he look at you like you are a thing? Because there is a difference, and I have been alive long enough to tell. He asks me, Elena said. Her voice cracked a little. Before he does anything, Graciela, he asks. Graciela nodded slowly. She patted Elena's hand twice. Then keep him, she said. The ones who ask are the ones worth keeping. But keep your own key to your own front door. Always. Promise me that. I promise. The 3rd week was when the quiet broke. Luca was supposed to pick her up from the shop at 7 on a Friday. She closed the register. She pulled on her coat. She locked the back door and then the front door, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk at 6:58 and the black car was already at the curb, the way it always was. The door opened. She stepped in. But the man in the back seat wasn't Luca. He was a stranger, and he had a gun in his lap, and by the time Elena understood what was happening, the door had already closed behind her, and the car had already pulled away from the curb. "Don't scream," the stranger said. His voice was flat, accented. "Don't move. Put your hands where I can see them. We're going to have a very short conversation, and then you'll go home." Elena's whole body went cold. She put her hands where he could see them. She couldn't feel her legs. "Who are you?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is this. Your boyfriend has made some people very angry. He put a man named Daniel Marchetti on a train 2 weeks ago. Daniel Marchetti was not his to put on a train. Daniel Marchetti worked for us. Do you understand?" She didn't. She understood nothing. She shook her head. "Your boyfriend," the stranger went on patiently, "took something that belonged to us. A debt, carried on the back of a man we owned. And he took that man out of our reach. We want compensation, and you are going to help us get it. Not because you want to. Because if you don't, we are going to hurt you, and we are going to hurt your mother. Oh, you didn't know we knew about your mother's grave. We know. We know which florist delivered the roses for her funeral. We know the address of the flower shop where you work. We know the apartment where you sleep. So, you're going to call your boyfriend. Now. And you're going to tell him that you want to meet him tonight, alone, at an address that I'm going to give you. And you're going to tell him to come without his people. And if he comes, we talk. If he doesn't, well, then we have a different conversation with you. Do you understand?" Elena's hand was shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone he pushed into her fingers. She thought, "I'm going to die in this car." She thought, "I should have kept my own key." She thought, "Luca." Then she thought, clearly, through the fear, no. The stranger wanted her to call Luca. He wanted her to tell him to come alone. He wanted her to lure him somewhere. And she understood with a perfect, freezing clarity what would happen if she did. So she dialed. She put the phone to her ear. And when Luca picked up and said her name, she said, her voice shaking in exactly the way the stranger wanted it to, "Luca, I'm so sorry, I need you to come." And then, in the smallest breath she could manage, one word he would remember. "Peonies." There was a pause on the other end of the line so short that the stranger in the car did not catch it. And then Lucas said, gently, "Of course, sweetheart. Tell me where." She gave him the address the stranger had written on a piece of paper. She told him to come alone. She told him she was sorry. The stranger took the phone away and smiled. He told her she had done well. He told her she was going to live. He told her he was going to drop her off at her apartment, and that if she called anyone or left the apartment before midnight, people she loved would die. The car stopped at the corner of her block. She got out. She walked up the 3 flights to her apartment. She closed the door behind her. She locked both locks and the chain. Then she sat on her kitchen floor in the dark and she waited. Because Luca had said, of course, sweetheart. And that was the word he had never once called her except the day in the coffee shop when they had needed a cover. And she understood that he had heard her. Peonies. Elena's favorite flower. He had asked her in the restaurant what her favorite flower was, and he had listened, and he had remembered, and she had used the word because it was the only word that belonged only to them. The call was not what it seemed. He knew. She sat in the dark for almost 3 hours. The first hour was the longest hour of her life. The second hour she prayed, to nothing in particular, the way her mother had taught her to pray when she was small. The third hour her phone buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. 3 words. Stay where you are. And then, 40 minutes after that, the soft sound of a key in her lock. She hadn't given anyone a key. She stood up. The door opened. Lucas stepped inside. His coat was off, carried over his arm. There was a red line along his jaw where something had cut him. His white shirt had a dark stain low on the left side that could have been wine and wasn't. He closed the door behind him, relocked both locks and the chain. And then he crossed the apartment in 3 strides and pulled Elena into his chest so tightly she could feel his heart pounding through the shirt. He didn't speak for a long time. Neither did she. She just pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed in the smell of him, rain and wool, and something metallic under it, and she let herself shake, and he let her. When she could finally lift her head, she said, "You're bleeding. Not mine." "Luca, I need you to hear me," he said. He was still holding her. His hands were on her face now, on the sides of her jaw, and she could feel that his hands were shaking too, very faintly, in a way she would not have believed this man's hands were capable of. "They will not come for you again. Ever. There are 5 people in this city who know what happened tonight, and 4 of them are mine. The man who was in the car with you, his jaw worked. He's not going to be a problem. Do you understand what I am telling you? Yes. I am telling you that I handled it. That is all I will ever tell you about what happened tonight. I am not going to put those images in your head. You saved your own life tonight, Elena. You said peonies. Do you know how smart that was? Do you know? Luca. What? How did you get a key to my apartment? He almost laughed. It came out more like a breath. Graciela gave it to me. What? 2 weeks ago. She stopped by the restaurant. She said she was going to be difficult to kill, but that life was long, and she wanted someone to have a key who wouldn't use it unless the building was on fire or you were dying. He pressed his forehead to hers. She said I was not to come into your apartment while you were in it without your permission. Not ever. And I haven't. But she said if I ever needed to come in without you to get you, I could. And tonight I needed to. Elena started crying. She didn't mean to. It came out of her in a wave. Luca held her. He held her in the middle of her dark kitchen with the chain still on the door, and he did not say a single thing, and he did not promise her anything he could not deliver, and he did not tell her it was going to be all right, because he was not that kind of man. He just held her, until her breathing evened out, until her hands stopped shaking, until she could lift her face from his shoulder without the world tilting under her. I want you to stay tonight, she said. Not I don't mean. I don't want to be alone in this apartment tonight. I'll stay, he said, on the couch, or I'll stay in the hallway, whichever you prefer. The couch. The couch. He cleaned the cut on his jaw with a washcloth from her bathroom. She made him tea, and he drank it. She sat on the floor of her living room with her back against the couch, and he sat on the couch behind her, his hand resting lightly in her hair, not stroking, just resting there. And she fell asleep that way before midnight with the rain starting up again outside the window and the chain still drawn across her door. When she woke in the morning, he was still on the couch. He had not moved. He was reading the same newspaper he had been reading in the coffee shop 3 weeks ago, and when she blinked up at him, he looked down at her and smiled. For the first time since she had known him, really smiled, and she thought, there he is. There is the man underneath. The reckoning had already happened in the dark hours of that night, in the space she would never be allowed to see. But the aftermath played out slowly, in the days and weeks that followed, in small, quiet ways. 2 more men disappeared from the city the week after. The story Elena heard from a coworker at the flower shop, who heard it from her cousin who knew someone on the waterfront, was that a crew out of a neighboring city had tried to muscle into Luca Salvatore's territory and had been answered very quickly and very completely. No names, no details, just the fact, the way the weather was a fact. The block outside Elena's apartment was relit the following week, new city bulbs in the street lamps. A work crew that came out of nowhere and disappeared the same way. Tomas still stood at the end of the block some nights, but fewer. Graciela, when Elena asked her about the key, simply shrugged and said she hadn't wanted to worry her, and that a woman's insurance policy was her own business. Daniel Marchetti, according to a friend of a friend, had been seen working in a garage in a small town 600 miles away. He did not come back. He did not call. He did not write. He was simply gone, in the way that men who should have been stopped 4 months ago were sometimes, finally, stopped. And Elena was something new. She did not become someone else. That was the mistake she had expected to make, to be remade by this man, by this life, to lose her shape inside the shadow of his. It did not happen. What happened instead was slower and more interesting. She kept her apartment. She kept her job at the flower shop. She kept her own key. She kept the habit of making coffee in her own kitchen in the mornings, and she kept the habit of humming when she wrapped peonies in brown paper, and she kept the scholarship girl scrappiness that had gotten her through the first 23 years of her life and would get her through the next 60. But she slept now. She slept through the night. She answered the phone when it rang. She walked home from the flower shop on summer evenings with the sun still up, and she did not look over her shoulder. She laughed, really laughed, head tipped back at something Graciela said behind the counter, and she realized, with a small startled pleasure, that she had forgotten the sound of her own laugh over the last 4 months of running, and that she was finding it again a piece at a time. Luca did not move into her apartment. She did not move into whatever house or building he lived in. She never asked, and he never offered. They saw each other 3 or 4 evenings a week. They ate at the small Italian restaurant, and they ate at the diner down the block from the flower shop. And one night, he cooked her dinner in a kitchen she had never seen before, in a place that was clearly his home, but which he had made feel, for that evening, like a place that belonged to neither of them. He kissed her for the first time in that kitchen, over a pan of pasta he'd almost burned, and it was unhurried and unspectacular and somehow completely right, and afterwards he leaned his forehead against hers and said, "Finally." She laughed against his mouth. "I was starting to think I'd imagined the part in the coffee shop. You didn't imagine anything. You waited a month." "I'd have waited a year," he said, and she believed him. Graciela approved. Graciela had always approved. Graciela took one look at Luca the first time Elena brought him to the flower shop. He had come to pick her up after closing, and he had stepped inside to wait, and he had taken off his coat and stood by the cold case like a man who understood he was in someone else's sanctuary and would not dare to act otherwise, and Graciela had looked him up and down and said, in her careful, accented English, "You will sit down at that little table, and you will drink the coffee I am going to give you, and we will see." He had sat down. He had drunk the coffee. Graciela had talked at him for 40 minutes without a single break, in a mix of English and Spanish, and Luca had listened and answered in what Elena eventually realized was perfectly serviceable Spanish, and by the end of it Graciela had risen from her chair and said, "Mija, I approve." He listens. And Elena had laughed so hard she'd leaned against the counter for support, and Luca had looked up at her across the flower shop with his coffee cup still in his hand and something warm and steady in his gray eyes, and she had thought, "I am going to get to keep this. I am going to get to keep this." There was no grand engagement. Luca Salvatore was not that kind of man, and Elena Vasquez had been cured, for months ago, of wanting grand gestures. One evening in late summer, almost a full year to the day after the afternoon in the coffee shop, he walked her up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, and he stood on the landing with her while she unlocked her 2 locks, and before she pushed the door open he said, quietly, "I don't want to sleep on the couch anymore." She looked up at him. "No, no, then don't." It was not a proposal. It wasn't even a moving in. It was a door, held open a little wider. She stepped through it, and over the following months, slowly, the drawer she had cleared for him filled. The side of the bed that was his became his. The coffee mug he preferred ended up on the drying rack more often than not. His coat hung by her door. Her peonies bloomed on the fire escape in the early summer, and one morning she came into the kitchen and found him standing at the window looking at them with an expression she had never seen on his face before, and when she came up behind him and slid her arms around his waist, he said, without turning, "My mother grew these. I hadn't thought of that in 30 years. She held him tighter. "You can think of her now," she said. "It's safe now." And he covered her hands with his, and he did not answer her. And she understood that he was thinking of his mother for the first time in a very long time, and that a part of him that had been locked away since he was a boy was quietly, carefully, coming back into the room. Sometimes, on bad nights, Elena still dreamed of the coffee shop. She dreamed of the weight of Daniel's footsteps behind her and the cold of the stranger's gun in the black car. She woke gasping, and every time, Luca was there. He did not ask her to tell him about the dream. He did not try to reason her out of it. He simply turned on the lamp, and he poured her a glass of water, and he sat with her on the edge of the bed with his hand between her shoulder blades, and he waited. "I'm still afraid sometimes," she said one night, about 6 months in. "Of course you are. Does it go away?" "No," he said. "Not completely, but it gets smaller, and you get bigger around it. That's the trick. You just keep growing." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "How do you know?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because I lost my brother 20 years ago," he said. "And for a long time I thought the hole he left in me was the size of the room. And then one day I noticed the room had gotten bigger, and the hole was still the same size, but it didn't take up the whole room anymore. That's all grief is, in the end. You grow around the thing you can't fix." She closed her eyes. "Is that what you're doing with me? Helping me grow around it?" "No, sweetheart." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm just sitting in the room with you while you do it yourself. That's all anyone can ever do for anyone else." 2 years after the afternoon in the coffee shop, Elena opened her own flower shop. Graciela had offered to sell her the old one, but Elena had wanted her own, wanted the risk of it, wanted to build something her mother would have recognized as hers. She found a storefront 6 blocks from her apartment with a green awning and morning light that came in at exactly the right angle for drying eucalyptus. She named it after her mother. She opened on a Tuesday in June. Graciela came. Luca came. A small handful of people from her old life came. And when she unlocked the door for the first time as the owner, Luca was standing at her shoulder with his hands in his coat pockets. And he did not try to do anything for her. And he did not try to take the moment from her. And when she turned to him with her hands shaking a little on the keys, he just smiled and said, quietly, "Go on. It's yours." She went in first. He followed. And the shop, which was cold and empty and smelled of new paint, became within hours warm and full of stems and color and the low murmur of people she loved. And Elena Vasquez stood behind a counter that belonged to her. And she thought about the woman who had walked into a coffee shop 2 years ago with nothing but a cappuccino and a prayer. And she thought about how that woman had grabbed a stranger's hand. And she thought about how sometimes the scariest thing you do in your life is the thing that saves it. Luca never told her the details of what had happened in the night hours after the black car. She never asked. She understood, in a way that surprised her, that some of the things he did to keep her safe were things she did not need to carry, and that loving him well meant trusting him to carry those things alone. In return, he carried them alone. He never asked her to forgive him for what he was. He never tried to hide it from her either. He was a man who had inherited a dark inheritance and had chosen, inside the limits of what he had been given, to be as good as he was able. He asked. He listened. He waited. He did not break. And on the nights when she woke gasping, he was there. And on the nights when he went very quiet, and she could see that he was far away in some country of grief she did not fully know, she was there. And that, in the end, was what made what they had sustainable, that neither of them was fixing the other, that neither of them was trying. They were just sitting in the room together, while each of them grew, in their own way, around the spaces where something had once been lost. The day Daniel Marchetti died, for years after he had been put on the train, a small news item appeared in a regional paper 600 miles away. A fight outside a bar. A man nobody in that town had known well. Elena read the news item twice. She put the paper down. She waited for the feeling, whatever it was going to be. It came slowly. It was not relief, and it was not grief. It was something quieter. It was the recognition that the last piece of thread still connecting her to the worst year of her life had been cut, not by her, and not by Luca, but by the life Daniel Marchetti had chosen to live on his own. She walked into the kitchen. Luca was drinking coffee at the counter. She told him. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, carefully, "Are you all right?" "Yes." "Do you want me to do anything?" "No. I just wanted you to know." He nodded. He put down his coffee. He came around the counter and pulled her into his arms, and he held her the way he had held her in the dark kitchen the night of the black car, the way he had held her 100 times since, the way a man holds a woman when he has decided, a long time ago, that the shape of his life will be organized around the shape of hers. She stayed there a long time. Then she lifted her face, and she said, "Luca." "Yes." "Tell me I'm taken." He almost laughed. He bent his head, and he pressed his lips to the top of her knuckles, and he said, in the same low voice he had used 2 years ago in a coffee shop neither of them had ever walked back into, "You are taken. And you are safe. And you are loved. In that order, Elena. For as long as I'm alive." She grew older in the shop with the green awning. She and Luca did not marry, not for a long time, and when they finally did it was in Graciella's backyard on a Tuesday morning with 10 people present and no photographer and peonies in her hand. She kept her own name. She kept her own key. She kept the humming in the flower shop and the way she laughed when Graciella, now almost 80 and still missing nothing, teased her from behind the counter. She kept the small framed photograph of her mother on the windowsill above the sink. And she kept the cream-colored card, the one Luca had slipped onto the seat of the car in the rain that first afternoon, the plain card with just a number on it and no name, in the back of a drawer in the nightstand that was hers. She took it out sometimes, on quiet mornings, and she looked at it. Not because she needed to remember him, he was there, in the kitchen, most mornings, drinking his coffee. She looked at it because she wanted to remember her. The woman who had walked across the floor of a coffee shop 2 years, and then 10 years, and then 20 years ago now. The woman who had sat down across from a stranger with nothing to recommend the decision but her own exhausted instinct, and who had asked for 1 minute of pretending, and who had gotten, in exchange, the rest of her life. That woman had saved herself. Luca Salvatore had opened a door for her. He had closed a door behind her. He had stood between her and the thing that was trying to break her. But the moment had been hers. She had crossed the room. She had reached out her hand. And the woman in the mirror, now, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes, and a wedding ring on her finger, and a flower shop with a green awning, and a husband who asked before he did anything, and who had never once raised his voice to her in 20 years, was the woman that other woman had been reaching toward, all the way back in that coffee shop on that gray afternoon, with the rain ticking against the window and a stranger in a charcoal suit about to lower his newspaper. She had reached. He had met her, and nothing in the world was ever the same again. That is the whole story. A woman in a coffee shop, a man with a newspaper, a single sentence across a small table tell him you're taken, and a life that unspooled out of that sentence the way a long ribbon unspools out of a small, tight knot, into something softer and wider and warmer than either of them had any right to expect. It is not a tidy story. It is not a safe one. The world they lived in was still the world it had always been, and there were nights, even years later, when Luca came home late, and Elena lay awake listening for his step on the stair. But the door, when he came through it, was always the same door. And the hand, when it reached for hers in the dark, was always the same hand. And the quiet that settled over the apartment when he lay down next to her was the quiet of a room in which two people, once strangers, had agreed a long time ago to keep growing, in their own ways, around the spaces where something had once been lost. And that, in the end, was enough. That was everything. Thank you so much for staying until the end. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now were made for you. I think you'll love them. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. 5 years into her marriage, Elena had learned that a life built alongside another person's dangerous world was not a shape you ever finished learning. It kept revealing new corners. She had learned the rhythm of his lateness, the difference between a late that meant he had been held up at the restaurant with Tomas and Graciella's nephew going over the books, and a late that meant something else, something she would not ask about, and he would not volunteer. She had learned the particular way he removed his watch when he came in at 3 in the morning, setting it on the edge of the sink before he washed his hands for longer than the task required. She had learned that some nights he slept with his back against hers, and some nights he slept with his face turned toward the window, and that the nights of the window were nights when she could put her hand flat against his shoulder blade and feel the faint tremor of a man who had done something earlier in the evening he was still carrying. She did not ask. She had stopped asking somewhere in the second year. She had learned that asking was not love. Asking was a performance of closeness that cost him more than it cost her, and she had decided, a long time ago, that she would not be a woman who demanded a man narrate his own wound in order to prove he deserved her comfort. She gave the comfort without the narration, and in return, slowly, across years, the tremor came less often, and the window nights came less often, and Luca slept against her back more often than he slept turned away, and she understood in some quiet, bone-deep way that this was what people meant when they talked about a marriage, not the wedding in Graciella's backyard, not the ring, not even the shared drawer. It was this, the room they had built together in which neither of them had to explain the weather to be allowed to stand inside it. The flower shop with the green awning had moved, in its second year, across the street to a larger storefront when the building's old owner retired, and Elena had a line of credit and a steady enough book of clients to risk it. She had named the new shop the same name her mother's name, Margarita, and the green awning had come with her. She was 30 now. She had 3 full-time employees and an apprentice arrangement with the local community college and a standing contract with 2 restaurants and a funeral home in the next neighborhood. She had built something. It was not large. It was the size she wanted it to be. When women came in to ask about bouquets for their mothers' birthdays, she could remember the names of their mothers from the previous year, and when they came back the year after, they could count on her to remember the name again. That, she had decided, was what a shop was supposed to be. She had decided this alone. It was one of many things she had decided alone in those years, not because Luca would have disagreed with her, but because she had recognized early that the gravity of his world was strong enough to pull small decisions out of her orbit if she let it, and she would not let it. Her shop was her shop. Her books were her books. Her bank account was her bank account. Luca had offered, more than once, to help with anything she needed and to buy anything she wanted, and she had looked at him each time with quiet, steady eyes and said she would tell him if she needed it, and she never had, and he had never asked again, and that was one of the many reasons she loved him. It was a Thursday in late October when the woman came into the shop. Rain had been on and off all day, Elena was behind the counter wrapping a small arrangement of white ranunculus for a customer who had called that morning and needed a sympathy piece by closing. The woman came in with the bell and stood just inside the door, dripping onto the mat, and she was not wearing a coat. That was the first thing Elena noticed. It was 43 degrees outside and raining, and the woman had on a thin knit cardigan over a gray t-shirt, and she was holding a child on her hip. The child was maybe 2, a little girl. She had dark hair stuck to her forehead with rain, and she was quiet in the way children are quiet when they have learned that being loud is dangerous. Elena knew that kind of quiet. She set the ranunculus down very carefully. "Hi," Elena said, keeping her voice low and warm, the voice she used for customers who came in crying after funerals. "Can I help you find something?" The woman blinked. Her eyes were brown and enormous and exhausted, and for a moment Elena thought she was not going to answer. Then she said, I'm sorry. I saw your sign. I was walking. I'm looking for a place that sells. Her hand moved in a small broken gesture at the shop, at the flowers, and Elena watched her try to invent a reason for being inside the store and fail. Come sit down, Elena said. She came around the counter. She did not hurry. She did not touch the woman. She simply gestured to the small wooden chair near the window that had been there for 3 years now, for elderly customers who needed a rest, and she moved the little pile of catalogs off the seat and stepped back so the woman could sit if she wanted to. The woman sat. The little girl on her hip did not make a sound. I'm going to get you a towel, Elena said, and I'm going to put the kettle on, because it's cold. Okay. The woman nodded without looking up. Elena went into the back room. She took one long breath. Then she took the kettle from its place on the little hot plate and filled it, and she pulled 2 clean towels from the linen closet, and she came back out into the shop. The woman was still sitting in the chair. The little girl had slid down onto her mother's lap and was pressing her face against her mother's chest with her eyes closed, and Elena understood, looking at them, that this child had been held for a long time without being put down, and that the mother's arms were probably aching beyond anything she could feel anymore. Elena handed her a towel. She did not ask any questions. She watched the woman dry her child's hair, inexpertly, the way people do things when they have been running on no sleep for days, and she watched her dry her own hair with what was left of the towel, and she watched her look up at Elena for the first time properly. I don't have money, the woman said. I wasn't going to buy anything. I just came in because I saw the awning and I was looking for a place where I saw the light. I'm sorry. You don't need money, Elena said. Sit there. I'll be right back. She went back behind the counter and she finished the ranunculus. Her hands were steady. Her hands had been steady for a long time. She tied the ribbon and set the arrangement in the cooler, and she wiped the counter, and she picked up the phone, and she called the customer who had ordered the arrangement and apologized, and said the flowers would be delivered in the morning instead, and the customer, a woman whose sister had died, said that was fine in the soft, flat voice of fresh grief, and Elena hung up. Then she turned the sign on the front door from open to closed and drew the blind halfway, so that the shop's light was still visible from the street, but the interior was not. And she came back to the chair by the window, and she pulled up a small stool, and she sat down in front of the woman so that their eyes were level. My name is Elena, she said. What's yours? The woman looked at her for a long time. Then she said, Mira. Hi, Mira. Who's this? This is Sol. Hi, Sol. The little girl didn't look up. Elena did not try to make her. Elena looked at Mira instead, and at the faint yellow of a bruise near her hairline, and at the way her cardigan hung wrong on one shoulder as if it had been pulled at, and at the way her lips were chapped, and at the way she was sitting on the very edge of the chair with her feet flat and her knees angled toward the door, the body language of a woman ready to run. Mira, Elena said quietly, are you running from someone? Myra's eyes closed. She did not answer. Elena did not push. She waited. The kettle in the back started to whistle. Elena got up, slowly, and went and turned it off, and came back, and by the time she sat down again Mira was crying silently, not moving, tears sliding down her face, and she said in a very small voice, yes. Elena made her tea. She put honey in it, and set it on the little table beside the chair, and she let Mira hold it without drinking. She asked careful, narrow questions, the kind whose answers could not be used to put Mira in more danger than she was in, the kind that let Mira talk around her own life instead of through it. The story came out over 40 minutes in pieces. His name was Ruslan. He was not Myra's husband, He was the man she had lived with for 3 years, the man whose child soul was, the man she had met when she was 19 and he was 28, in a city Mira had already learned not to name. He was not someone you left. You could leave men in this world and you could leave men in that world, Mira said, and the men you could leave were called one thing and the men you could not were called another, and Ruslan was the second. She had left anyway, 9 days ago. She had taken Sol and a duffel bag and $240, and she had gotten on a bus going north. The money was gone now. She was 3 cities away from where she had started. The last thing she had done before she walked into Elena's shop was buy a banana for Sol with the last of the coins in her pocket at a corner store 2 blocks over. She had seen a man across the street when she came out of the corner store. She thought she had seen him twice before in the last 4 days. She did not know if she was imagining it. She could not stop imagining it. Mira, Elena said, carefully, when you say the men you can't leave. What do you mean? Myra's eyes came up to hers. They were the eyes of a woman who had been inside a thing long enough to know its shape. I mean, he's the kind of man, she said, who is people. I mean, he knows people. I mean, when I was living with him, there were men in the apartment sometimes. And when they came over, I was supposed to take Sol into the bedroom and close the door and not come out until he told me. That kind. That's what I mean. Elena sat very still. She knew this kind. She knew this exact kind. Do you know a name? She said. Of the organization. Or a neighborhood. Or anything about who he answers to. No. Mira shook her head. He never told me. I know names of people who came to the apartment, but I don't know anything useful. I'm sorry. I should go. She started to stand up. Mira, I shouldn't have come in here. I shouldn't have dragged you. You don't know what these people are like. You don't know. I know, Elena said. Mira stopped. She looked at her. Elena met her eyes steadily. I know exactly what these people are like. Sit down, Mira. Please. Elena closed the shop at 4 in the afternoon. She called her 2 apprentices and told them not to come in tomorrow. She would pay them for the day, and she would explain later. She made grilled cheese on the little hot plate in the back, because Sol had come awake and was looking at Elena with enormous solemn eyes, and Mira, when offered food, had almost cried again. They ate in the back room of the shop among the shelves of vases and the rolls of ribbon and the paper-wrapped stems of tulips waiting for the morning's arrangements. And Elena watched Mira feed her daughter first and watched Sol's color come back. And she thought about how she had been Mira 4.5 years ago in a different coffee shop in a different part of the city, and how her instinct on that afternoon had been to look around a room and pick the person who looked like they would not back down. And she thought about what it had cost her to walk across that floor, and she thought about what Mira had done to walk into this shop, and she understood that she was standing inside a hinge in her own life, and that what she did in the next hour would determine what kind of woman she was. She did not call Luca yet. She was going to. She knew she was going to. But she did not call him yet, because she had understood something in the last hour sitting across from Mira, something she had not put words to in the 5 years of her marriage. And the understanding was this. She did not want to hand this woman over to her husband like a package. She did not want the first adult Mira met in this shelter to be a man. Mira had spent 3 years not speaking when men entered rooms. Elena was going to take this first hour and the next, and as many hours as Mira needed, and she was going to give this woman what Elena herself had been given that afternoon in the coffee shop, the simple, world-changing experience of another human being taking her side before any deal had been struck. When she called Luca, she called him from the back room with the door half open so that Mira could see her. She kept her voice calm and even. I need you to do something for me, she said. I'm going to tell you what I need, and I'd like you not to ask me anything about it until I'm finished. Can you do that? A pause. Yes. I have a woman in my shop. She's in the back with her daughter. I'm going to bring them home. I'd like you to not be there when I do. I'd like you to come back tomorrow morning after breakfast. I'd like Tomas at the curb tonight the way he used to be at my old place, and I'd like whoever else you think is appropriate, but I'd like them outside, not inside. I'll handle inside. Tomorrow morning, after breakfast, I would like you to come home, and I would like you to meet Mira, and I would like you to help me figure out what to do next. Okay. There was a silence. Then Lucas said, very quietly, you know what you're doing. Yes. You know who she might be. Yes. Sweetheart. Whatever you need. Thank you. Elena. Yes. I am extremely proud of you, he said. And then, with the slightest crack in his voice, and extremely afraid. Please be careful. I will be. Tomas at the curb. You tomorrow. Okay. Okay. He hung up. Elena stood in the back of her flower shop and looked at the phone and let her hand shake for exactly 10 seconds. And then she put the phone in her pocket, and she went back out into the shop and smiled at Sol. And she said, "Let's go home." The apartment Elena and Luca shared now was not the old walk-up with the 3 flights of stairs. After the first 2 years of marriage, they had moved to a larger place, still modest by his standards and still luxurious by hers, with a small garden at the back that Elena tended on Sundays and a guest room that had never had a guest in it in the 19 months since they'd moved in. That guest room was where Elena took Mira and Sol. The bed was made up with fresh sheets she had washed only a week ago. Elena had a habit of keeping that room ready, without quite admitting to herself why. The little ensuite bathroom had towels stacked in it, and a new toothbrush in its packaging in the drawer. Elena had put the toothbrush there one Sunday in May with a faint private smile at her own foresight, and now, pushing open the door of the guest room with Sol asleep on her hip, she understood exactly why. Mira set her duffel down on the floor. She turned in the middle of the room and she looked at the bed with the turned-down sheets and the folded extra blanket at the foot and the small lamp glowing warmly on the nightstand. And she put her hands over her face and she said, in a voice that cracked, "I don't understand why you're doing this. I don't understand why." "Because somebody did it for me," Elena said. "And because I've been waiting a long time to do it for somebody else." Elena sat up with Mira that night. She did not intend to. She had meant only to stay until Mira and Sol were in bed and then go into her own room and try to sleep. But Mira had fed Sol the rest of the grilled cheese and put the little girl down in the big bed and climbed in beside her. And Sol had fallen asleep almost immediately, and Mira had then sat up against the headboard and begun to cry in silence, her shoulders shaking and her hand pressed flat over her own mouth so as not to wake the child. And Elena had come in with a glass of water and sat down on the foot of the bed and not said anything for an hour and a half. At 3 in the morning, Mira said, "Can I tell you the worst of it?" "Yes." "It's not something I've told anyone." "Then it's safe with me. I don't tell anyone anything." And Mira told her. She told her things Elena had not been told, even when Elena herself had been the one bleeding. She told her the specific shape of the nights she had spent locked in the bedroom with Sol pressed against her chest, and what she had thought about doing, and what she had not done because she had thought Sol was listening even in sleep. She told her the names of the 3 men she had watched walk in and out of that apartment the week before she ran. She told her the address of the apartment and the neighborhood and the street, and Elena registered each detail without reaction, not because she was not reacting, but because reacting was a luxury this woman could not afford at 3 in the morning, and Elena had learned, from Luca, across 5 years of watching him, how to receive a piece of information without letting her own face give the speaker anything to take back. When Mira finally ran out of words, she looked at Elena and said, "Who is your husband?" "What do you mean?" "You told me on the phone you said Tomas. You said my husband. You were organizing something. You know what kind of world this is. You know." "Elena, who are you married to?" Elena looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, evenly, "I'm married to a man who did for me what I am trying to do for you. He's a good man. He runs something. You will meet him in the morning, and you do not have to stay here if meeting him frightens you. I will find you somewhere else. But I want you to know, before you meet him, what he is and what he is not. He is not Ruslan. He has never raised his hand to me. He has never raised his voice to me. I have never been in a room with him in which I was afraid of him. You understand that there are men who carry what they carry in different ways." "I understand," Mira whispered. "But the people his people, he is not going to hand you to anyone, Mira. That is not how this is going to work. That is not how any of this works." "Okay. Okay. Okay." Mira laid her head down next to Sol. Her eyes were closed before Elena left the room. And when Elena went into her own bedroom, Luca was not there, and she had known he would not be. He had understood what she had asked him for, exactly as she had asked it, and she lay down on her own side of the bed, and she thought about how loud it was in a house where no one was afraid, and how long it had taken her to earn that particular quiet, and how another woman was sleeping down the hall under her roof tonight for the first time in, possibly years. Luca came home at 9 in the morning. Elena had made coffee. Mira had been awake since 6. Sol was sitting on the kitchen floor stacking the lids of Elena's pots, quiet and absorbed, the stacking of lids apparently a thing Mira had taught her daughter to do silently a long time ago. When Luca came in through the front door, he paused in the foyer. He did not come into the kitchen. Elena walked into the foyer instead. She kissed him briefly, her hand flat against his chest, and she said, "Come in slowly. Sol is on the floor. Mira is at the table. Say hello to me first. Don't move toward them. Let them see you for a minute before you say anything." Luca listened. Luca had always listened. He came into the kitchen behind her, and he stopped in the doorway, and he said, to Elena, loud enough for the others to hear, "Is the coffee the good one?" "I made the good one," Elena said. "Thank God." He hung his coat on the back of the nearest chair. He did not sit. He did not approach the table. He walked to the coffee pot with his back half turned to Mira and Sol, and he poured himself a cup, and he leaned against the counter, and he said, looking at his wife, "Introduce us when you're ready." Elena watched Mira watch him, watched her register the coat going on the chair instead of the coat staying on a man who might leave suddenly. Watched her register the man standing with his back half turned instead of facing the women head-on. Watched her register the voice that did not fill the kitchen the way certain voices fill kitchens. Watched Mira's shoulders come down, incrementally, about 3/4 of an inch. "Mira," Elena said. "This is my husband, Luca. Luca, this is Mira. And on the floor is Sol." "Good morning, Mira," Luca said, and nodded once, and did not hold out his hand. "Good morning, Sol." Sol did not look up from the lids. She kept stacking them. Luca did not react to this. He sipped his coffee. He waited. After a minute, he said, to Mira, still leaning against the counter, "My wife tells me you have had a very long week. I'd like to help if I can. I understand if you don't want it. We can talk about what you would like, and what I can do, and what I can't do, and you can ask me any questions you want, and if at any point you'd rather not be in this room with me, my wife will take you upstairs and I'll go for a walk. Okay?" Mira stared at him. Then, very slowly, she nodded. Okay. It took 2 hours for them to talk through the shape of what needed to happen. Luca asked the right questions in the right order, and Elena watched him do it. And she thought again, as she had thought many times in the 5 years of their marriage, that the thing that had kept her with him was not his protection and not his resources and not his quiet. It was the fact that he asked the right questions in the right order. He asked Mira what she wanted. He asked her where she had wanted to go, before she had simply been running. He asked her whether there was a person she trusted anywhere. He asked her whether there was a city she had ever been to that had felt like somewhere she could stand to live. He asked her whether she had any paperwork, any identification, any bank account at all, and when she shook her head, he nodded and said that was all right. He asked her about Sol's birth certificate. He asked whether she had any family. He asked her what she was good at, before Ruslan, before the apartment, before the 3 years. Mira cried at that question. It took her a long time to answer it. She said, finally, that she had gone to nursing school for 1.5 years before she dropped out. She said she had liked it. She said she had been good at it. Luca nodded and wrote the word nursing down on a piece of paper in front of him in his careful angular hand and drew a box around it. Elena watched him do it. She watched him turn a woman's broken story into a small list of recoverable things. She thought, that is what he is. That is exactly what he is. This is the man my husband is. The rest of it he handled quietly, the way he handled everything. Over the next 7 days, Mira and Sol stayed in the guest room. Elena closed the shop for 3 of those days and opened its short hours for the rest. Tomas remained at the curb. A woman named Jean, whom Elena had met once and who Luca had worked with for years in some capacity Elena had never asked about, came to the house twice, once to photograph Mira and Sol, and once to deliver new identification in a different state's name, and a social security card, and a birth certificate for Sol that looked like it had been issued in a small-town hospital 2 years ago. Luca sat down with Mira on the 3rd evening and walked her through the paperwork. He told her the name she would use. He told her the city. He told her that she would enter a licensed practical nursing program 2 months from now, at a community college he had already spoken with, at which her tuition had already been paid, and at which a woman on faculty, who owed him a favor, would quietly make sure Myra's first semester was survivable. He told her the name of a woman in that new city whose house she would stay at for the first 6 weeks, a woman who had been where Mira was now 15 years ago, who ran a small daycare out of her basement for other women just arriving, who would watch Sol while Mira was at school. He told her that Lynn was not going to know where she had gone. He told her carefully, his eyes on hers so she could see that he was telling her the truth, that Lynn was not going to be looking for her for very long, and that he could not promise her it would be instantaneous, but that within 6 months the problem would be quieter than it was today, and that Elena's block would no longer have a watcher on it, and that the next phase of Myra's life would begin in the ordinary way the next phases of lives were supposed to begin, with parent-teacher conferences and pediatrician appointments, and the small, boring, miraculous weight of it. Mira cried through most of that conversation. At the end of it, when she could speak, she looked at Luca and said, "Why are you doing this for me?" Luca looked down at his hands on the table. It took him a moment. Then he said, "Because my wife asked me to." He looked up. "But also because you are the second woman in my life who has asked for help from a stranger and gotten it, and I would like that number to keep going up. That is the only way I know to make this life mean something. Is that all right with you?" "Yes," Mira whispered. "Good." Luca closed the folder on the table. "Then we start Monday." On the night before Mira and Sol left, Elena sat with Mira on the back porch. It was cold. They had blankets. Sol was asleep upstairs. Elena had made hot chocolate, and the mugs were warming their hands, and the two women sat next to each other and looked out at the small garden Elena had turned for winter the week before. "I need to say something to you," Mira said. "Okay. I am going to carry this for the rest of my life. What you did. What he did. I am going to be a nurse, probably. I am going to be a woman in a small house with a daughter in a school in a place I have never lived before. I am going to try to become a boring woman, Elena. A woman with no story. That is my goal. That is what I want for Sol, a mother with no story. And I want you to know that underneath the boring woman I am trying to become, there is going to be a fire that is your fire and your husband's fire, and it is going to keep me warm for the rest of my life. And I don't know how to thank people for things like this. I don't know the words. I don't, Mira." "What?" "Come back here sometime. In 10 years. In 20. Bring Sol. Show me the boring woman you became. That's how you thank me." Mira laughed. It came out wet. "Okay. Okay." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Mira said, quietly, "Can I ask you one thing?" "Yes." "The man who hurt you, the one your husband made go away, where is he now?" Elena looked out at the garden. She thought about how to answer. She thought about lying. She did not lie. "He's dead," she said. "He died in a fight in a town 600 miles from here, 2 years after my husband put him on a train. It had nothing to do with us. It was the life he chose for himself." Mira was quiet. Then she said, "Do you think about him?" "Almost never anymore." "Did it take a long time?" "Yes," Elena said. "It takes the time it takes. Nobody gets to tell you how long. Not even the person you marry after." Mira nodded slowly. She lifted her mug to her mouth. "I am going to get to the almost never part," she said. "I just want you to know. I know you are." "How do you know?" Elena looked at her. She looked at this woman who had walked into her shop 8 days ago with a child on her hip and no coat, and at who she was now, at the new flatness in her hands, at the way her shoulders were sitting farther down her spine than they had the first night, at the way she was able to sit on a porch in the cold dark and ask a question without apologizing for it. "Because you already started," Elena said. They left on Monday morning in a car Elena had never seen before, driven by a woman she did not know. Elena hugged Mira for a long time at the curb. She hugged Sol. Sol hugged her back, quickly, with one small arm, before burying her face again in her mother's shoulder. Elena stood on the sidewalk with Luca as the car pulled away. She did not cry until it had turned the corner. Then she did. She cried against Luca's chest for about 2 minutes, her hands fisted in his coat, and he held her silently. And when she was done, she stepped back and wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and she said, "I'm all right." "I know you are." "Do you?" "Yes. I know every shape you make, Elena. I have known them for 5 years. That was not the shape of not being all right. That was the shape of being all right and being tired." She laughed. She could not help it. "You are an unbearable man." "I know." He took her hand and turned it over and kissed the inside of her wrist, the place where Daniel had once left a bruise she had shown him on their second afternoon together. "Come inside, sweetheart. It's cold. I'll make you coffee. The good one, not the one you make. The one you make isn't that much better." Agree to disagree. "Luca." "Yes." She stopped walking. He stopped with her. She looked up at him on the sidewalk in front of their house. The house where 8 days ago a woman and a child had walked in with nothing, and where that morning the woman and the child had walked out with names and a plan and a fire. And she said, "Thank you for not asking me to explain. When I called you that night, thank you for not asking me any of the questions you could have asked, and for just doing it the way I asked you to do it, and for trusting me to know what that woman needed." Luca looked at her for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "Elena, I have been waiting 5 years for you to tell me what you needed me to do. I have been waiting 5 years for you to understand, all the way down, that you have every lever in this house you could ever want, and that the only reason I have not handed them to you before now is that you had not asked for them. I am not going to tell you I was proud of you that night. You already know I was. What I will tell you is this. I have loved you a long time. I have loved you since the coffee shop. But the night you called me about Mira was the night I realized I was married to you, really married, the way my mother meant the word when she talked about my father. I have been your husband for 5 years, sweetheart. That night, you became my wife." She did not know what to say to that. She stood on the sidewalk and she looked at him, and she thought about the woman she had been, not even 5 years ago, who had walked across a coffee shop floor out of nothing but instinct, and she thought about the woman she was now, who had spent 8 days quietly keeping another woman and a child alive inside her own house. And she understood that the distance between those two women was the whole architecture of her marriage. It was not a distance Luca had built. It was not a distance anyone had given her. She had built it herself, a little at a time, while sitting in the room with him, while he had been sitting in the room with her. The two of them, growing, quietly, around the shapes of what each of them had lost, until the room had turned into something large enough to let a third person, and a fourth, walk in and rest. "Come inside," she said. "I know. Luca. Yes. I love you. I know that too." He smiled. It was the smile he did not do for anyone else, the one she had discovered that morning in her apartment 5 years ago, when she had woken up on the living room floor with her head against the couch and his hand resting in her hair. "Come on. I'll make the coffee. You can pretend it isn't as good as yours." She laughed. She walked into her house. The door closed behind them. Inside, the guest room was empty and its sheets would need to be washed, and there were small sticky marks on the kitchen floor from where Sol had dropped a piece of apple 2 days ago. And there was a drawing on the fridge Mira had done for Elena while she was putting Sol down for a nap on Friday, a small rough sketch in colored pencil of a woman in a flower shop with a green awning, standing behind a counter. And in the doorway of the shop, there was another woman and a child, and above them, in Myra's careful handwriting, 3 words. La que abrió. The one who opened. Elena touched the drawing with the tips of her fingers. Luca came up behind her and put his arms around her and looked at it over her shoulder. And he said nothing for a long time, and she said nothing either, and outside the rain began again, ticking softly on the windows in a way that sounded, more than anything else, like the steady, unhurried, patient beginning of something. Mira called 11 months later to say she had passed her first semester nursing exams. She called 2 years after that to say she had finished her program. She sent a photograph, for years after she left, of Sol starting first grade in a red backpack that was almost as big as she was. Elena kept the photograph on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, next to the small framed picture of her own mother, and when visitors occasionally asked who the little girl in the red backpack was, Elena said, simply, "A friend of mine's daughter." She never said the rest. She never said, "That is the first woman I was able to save." She never said, "That is the child who slept in my guest room when she was 2 years old." She never said, "That is the shape of the chain I am part of now, the chain that has more links in it than I thought it would, and every link is a woman, and every link was made by the link before." Some chains, Elena had learned, are not supposed to be spoken out loud. Some chains are supposed to stay quiet and just hold. Some chains are what a life is for. And on the nights now, when Luca came home and hung his coat on the hook by the door and took off his watch and washed his hands for slightly longer than the task required, Elena did not flinch and did not ask. She poured him coffee. She sat with him at the kitchen table. She listened to whatever small piece of the day he was willing to tell her, and she held what he did not tell her in the same steady palm in which she held everything else he had asked her to hold. And she understood that this was the shape her life had become, and that the woman she had been in the coffee shop 5, 6, 7 years ago would not have recognized this shape, and would not have believed it possible, and would have wept to know that she was going to get to live inside it. That woman had not known. Elena knew now. She knew what she had walked across a floor toward. She knew what she had reached for. She knew what had met her. And sometimes, when she stood at the window of her kitchen in the late afternoon with a mug of coffee cooling in her hand, and Luca was in the garden pruning something he had decided to learn to prune because it amused him to learn small, unnecessary things in his middle age, and the light was doing that slanting gold thing it did in late October, and a little car was going by on the street outside, and in her chest there was nothing but the quiet, steady motion of a life that was finally, her own. She would think, quietly, without saying it aloud, the two words she had said to him across a small table in a coffee shop on the afternoon her life had turned. She did not say them anymore to warn him. She did not say them anymore to be protected. She said them now because they were true in a new way, in the way the best old sentences eventually become true in new ways if you keep them long enough. I'm taken. She said it to her kitchen. She said it to the rain. She said it to the photograph on the windowsill, and to the drawing still stuck to the fridge, and to the quiet room she had built with another broken, patient, listening person over the course of a decade, a room big enough now to shelter other people, a room that no one, not ever, was going to be able to take from her. I'm taken. She said it, and she smiled, and she went out into the garden to tell her husband that the coffee was getting cold.